Implementing the movie recommendations page is going to be so much simpler than you might think. And that's because we're going to reuse a lot of different components. Well, more specifically, we're going to reuse one really big component we've already created. So if we go to Filmpire, take a look at this. What does this remind you of? Well, let's go to our popular and look at it. It's exactly the same component that we are reusing here and here, but it's displaying different data. And that's the beauty of React. You can create reactive components that you can then reuse across your entire application. So let's start implementing it. We're going to go below our div and below our two grids because we're going to create a box right here. So let's create a box, and again, make sure that you have a div ending, grid ending, and then grid ending one more time. That box is going to have a margin top set to 5 rem, and also width is going to be equal to 100%. Inside of that box, we're going to have a typography, and that typography is going to have a variant, which is going to be equal to h3. It's going to have a gutter bottom, and also a line is equal to center. Inside of there, we can simply say something like, you might also like. Great, so if we save that, we can see you might also like, and that's centered on this entire page. So below this typography, we're going to have to loop through, so let's write that down, loop through the recommended movies. But the question is, how are we going to get all of the recommended movies for each and every movie that we visit? We have to implement a new Redux Toolkit query. So let's go ahead and go to our services, TMDB, and below this movie, we're going to write a new comment that's going to say get user specific lists. Our first list is going to be the recommendations. So right here, we can say get recommendations. That's going to be equal to builder.query, where we have an object. And inside of there, we can say query is equal to, and then we're going to have a callback function as we always do. Now, inside of that query, we of course have to get the movie ID. So right here, we're going to be accepting a movie ID and also the list we want to get. Finally, we have to form our query, and that's going to look like this: /movie /movie underscore ID /, and then again a template string list, and then question mark API underscore key is equal to TMDB API key. That's going to be our query. Of course, we can now export it, use get recommendations query, and now we can use it inside of our movie information. So let's scroll to the top, and right here we have to get that query by simply saying import use get recommendations query, and then that's going to be coming from // services, and I've just noticed that we already have that import, so we can just put it straight here. Finally, how do we call that hook? Well, we can do something like this. Const, the situation is going to be the same. We call it in the same way we call this one. We get the data, we're going to get the is fetching, and that's going to be equal to use get recommendations query. Now we have to keep in mind, what do we want to send to it? And we want to set, right here, we can change this to be an object. So we need to send an object with two different properties, the movie ID and the list. So right here, we can say object, and then we can say list is going to be set to / recommendations. And then we have to pass our movie ID. We can say movie underscore ID is just going to be equal to ID. We are already getting that ID right inside of here. Now, you might see that we're getting an error saying that data has already been declared, and that is true. Our current movie is the actual data. So we can simply rename that data : and that's going to be recommendations. Now we just rename that. Also, is fetching also exists. So we can rename is fetching to be something like is recommendations fetching, like this. And now we have these two variables that we can use. So let's go ahead and console log the recommendations to see if we are really getting them. Console log recommendations. I'm going to save that. And let's see what do we get. If I reload the page, everything seems fine. We're going to go to inspect and we get an object. This is the movie object coming from movie information, but the one we are looking for is going to be from line 32, and we get 21 different movies which are recommended after watching Free Guy. Great. So we can now loop over those recommended movies. Let's scroll down, and right here we can say, open a new dynamic block and say recommendations, meaning if there are recommendations, in that case we want to show something, and that something is going to be our movie list component. Remember, we've already created that. If we don't have our recommendations, then we can simply show a box, and that box is going to say, sorry, nothing was found. That's going to be fine, but we shouldn't be seeing this often. Our movie list seems to be not defined, so let's scroll to the top and let's import it. Right here, we can import our movie list component from // I think it's going to be just / like this because it's in the components folder. Great. So now we are showing our movie list, but we don't have anything in there. So we have to pass some props. More specifically, it's accepting the movies prop. So let's go ahead and pass it. Right here, we're going to say movies is going to be equal to recommendations. And let's save that. As soon as we do that, you can see that we get 21 recommended movies. This is great. But I also think that this is a bit too much. We just want to see, let's say, 2 rows of these movies, and we don't want to see this last row, which is half empty. So let's kind of cut that down to only 2 rows. We can do that by passing one more prop to our movie list called number of movies. And we can set that to be equal to 12. In this case, we only want to show 12. So we can go to our movie list. And now we can accept that one new prop called number of movies. And what we can do is simply slice them. So before mapping over them, we can call the .slice and say from 0 all the way to number of movies. .map. There we go. So we're going to get all the movies and then we're going to slice them from 0 to the number of movies, in this case 12. So if we save that, you can see we now have only 2 rows. Great. But now we might have an issue when we go to our main movie view. Of course, later on we're going to fix this, so we're not going to see a half empty row. But for now, that's great. In here, we're seeing all of the movies. And then if we go to a specific movie, in the recommendations, we can only see 2 rows. Great. And can you see how easy this was? We basically just passed our new data into the component that already existed. And we have our titles, our images, even our hovers, and everything else. Great. Again, the only thing we had to do was fetch the new data. And again, we did that with 3 lines because we are already used to making Redux Toolkit query calls. Of course, if I haven't told you the actual URL we have to make the API request to, you would just have to go to TMDB API and then search for it a bit, but I'm sure you would be able to find it extremely quickly. With that said, we've just implemented the entire You Might Like page. And the beauty of React is, now you'll be able to see that for every single movie you go to. There we go. We have our Shang-Chi, we have our top cast, the overview. All of this data is being automatically updated for each new movie you go to. That's phenomenal. As you can see right here, we get different recommendations for Cinderella movie. The cast has changed, And now we have this seamless transition between different movies, because now if you click on one of these movies, you get to that movie information page, which makes this application so much more interesting because you can keep moving between different movies and find new movies that you like. Amazing. So for now, I think the only main part that was left undone here was to implement the trailer feature. That way, a trailer for a movie is going to show up on our screen and we can watch it instantly. That's a great feature that all movie lovers are going to love. So let's go ahead and implement that in the next lecture.